Understanding inflation, why it goes up and down, explained. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating world of inflation. We'll explore what inflation is, why it goes up and down, and its impact on our lives. So, if you're ready to get your economics knowledge to the next level, hit that subscribe button, and let's get started. First things first, what is inflation? In simple terms, inflation is the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services rises, leading to a decrease in the purchasing power of a currency. To put it even more simply, it's when your money buys you less stuff over time. Causes of inflation. Now let's talk about why inflation happens in the first place. There are generally three main causes of inflation. First off is demand pull inflation. This occurs when there's an increase in demand for goods and services that outpaces their supply. When demand exceeds supply, businesses can raise their prices, causing inflation. Then there is cost push inflation. When the costs of production for goods and services rise, such as increased labor or raw material costs, businesses often pass those costs on to consumers through higher prices. And finally, built-in inflation. This is also known as wage price inflation. It happens when workers demand higher wages, and businesses, in turn, raise prices to cover those increased labor costs. Factors that can affect inflation. Inflation is influenced by a variety of factors. Some of the key ones include monetary policy. So, central banks, like the Federal Reserve in the U.S., can influence inflation through interest rates and money supply. Lowering interest rates or increasing the money supply can stimulate economic activity and potentially lead to higher inflation. Fiscal policy. Government spending and taxation policies can impact inflation. Increased government spending can boost demand and potentially lead to inflation, while tax cuts can have a similar effect. Supply shocks. Natural disasters, geopolitical events, or disruptions in the supply chain can lead to sudden changes in prices. For example, an oil crisis can drive up energy prices, leading to inflation. How to measure inflation? To track inflation, economists use various indices, but the most common one is the Consumer Price Index, CPI. The CPI measures the average change over time in the prices paid by urban consumers for a market basket of consumer goods and services. It's a useful tool to gauge how prices are changing for everyday items. Consequences of inflation. Inflation has both positive and negative consequences. Positive impacts. Inflation, when moderate and controlled, can have some positive impacts on the economy. Here are a few potential benefits. Encourages spending. Mild inflation can motivate consumers to spend money rather than hoard it. When people expect prices to rise, they are more likely to make purchases, which can stimulate economic activity and drive economic growth. Reduces the real burden of debt. Inflation can decrease the real value of debt. When the general price level rises, the amount of money owed in fixed dollar terms becomes less burdensome over time. This can benefit borrowers, including individuals with mortgages and businesses with loans. Promotes investment. Inflation can encourage businesses to invest in productive assets and projects rather than holding on to cash. This can lead to increased economic productivity and job creation. Supports. Wage growth. Inflation can result in higher nominal wages for workers. Even though prices are rising, if wages increase at a similar or faster rate, workers' purchasing power can be maintained or even improved. Fosters central bank flexibility. A moderate level of inflation provides central banks with some room to maneuver when conducting monetary policy. It allows them to use interest rates and other tools to stimulate economic activity during downturns. Reduces real interest rates. Inflation can lower real, inflation-adjusted, interest rates, making borrowing less expensive and potentially encouraging more investment and spending. Adjusts. Relative prices. Inflation can help adjust relative prices in the economy. Some prices may rise faster than others, reflecting changes in supply and demand conditions, which can help allocate resources more efficiently. It's important to note that these positive impacts are typically associated with moderate and stable inflation rates. When inflation becomes too high or unpredictable, it can lead to a variety of negative consequences, including eroding purchasing power, reducing savings, and creating uncertainty in financial markets. Central banks aim to maintain a stable inflation rate to balance these positive and negative effects. Negative impacts. Inflation can have several negative impacts on individuals, businesses, and the overall economy. Here are some of the key negative effects of inflation. Reduced purchasing power. When inflation occurs, the value of a currency decreases over time, which means that the same amount of money can buy fewer goods and services. This reduces the purchasing power of individuals, making it more expensive for them to buy essential goods and services, such as food, housing, and healthcare. Uncertainty. High or unpredictable inflation can create economic uncertainty. Businesses may be hesitant to invest in long-term projects, and consumers may delay spending or hoard assets to protect their wealth, which can hinder economic growth. Fixed income and savings. Erosion. Inflation erodes the real value of fixed income sources, such as pensions and bonds. People on fixed incomes, like retirees, may find it challenging to maintain their standard of living as their purchasing power diminishes. Additionally, the real value of savings in traditional savings accounts can decrease over time due to inflation. Interest rate. Uncertainty. Central banks may raise interest rates to combat high inflation, which can make borrowing more expensive. Businesses and individuals may find it harder to access credit, which can slow down economic activity and investment. Distorted price signals. Inflation can distort price signals in the economy. When prices rise due to inflation rather than changes in supply and demand, it becomes harder for businesses to make informed decisions about production and pricing. Economic inefficiency. High inflation can lead to economic inefficiency as people and businesses spend more time and resources on activities like hedging against inflation, rather than focusing on productive economic activities. Decreased investment. Inflation can discourage long-term investments because the real return on those investments may not keep pace with inflation. This can result in less investment in infrastructure, research and development, and other critical areas. International competitiveness. High inflation can reduce a country's international competitiveness. When a country's currency depreciates rapidly due to inflation, its exports may become more competitive, but it can also lead to higher costs for imported goods, potentially harming domestic industries. Social and political consequences. Persistent high inflation can lead to social unrest and political instability. People may become dissatisfied with their economic circumstances and governments' inability to control inflation. Wage price spirals. Inflation can lead to wage price spirals where workers demand higher wages to keep up with rising prices, and businesses respond by increasing prices, leading to a self-reinforcing cycle of inflation. It's important to note that not all inflation is inherently bad. Moderate, stable inflation is generally considered normal and can have some positive effects, such as incentivizing spending and investment. However, high or hyperinflation, as well as sudden and unexpected inflation, can have severe negative consequences for an economy. Central banks and policymakers often aim to maintain a target inflation rate that strikes a balance between stimulating economic activity and preserving the purchasing power of a currency. Managing inflation. Governments and central banks often strive to keep inflation at a stable, moderate level. This is typically done through various policy tools like monetary policy, adjusting interest rates to influence borrowing and spending, fiscal policy, controlling government spending and taxation, supply-side policies, encouraging increased production and efficiency. Conclusion. In summary, inflation is a complex economic phenomenon influenced by a variety of factors, and it can have significant effects on our lives. Understanding why inflation goes up and down is crucial for making informed financial decisions and navigating an ever-changing economic landscape. If you found this video informative, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And as always, stay curious and keep learning. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.